Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barrhead Boy.
Well, hello there, folks. Welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Nice to see you all again, or nice for you to see us, maybe. Great to be back. Got a really lively show for you here today, and I hope you're all going to enjoy it as much as I know I am. You might know I've switched my location. Where I normally record these is just slightly too warm. So I have relocated to the coolest room in the house that I can find. And but if you do hear lots of music and shouting, it is very much summertime here, and gardens are full, and barbecues are being had. And so I apologise for any music, shouting or screaming that you may hear. And that's just coming from this house. So a really packed show today. And before I bring on two of my guests, Iain Lawson, my resident, and I'm delighted to say Gareth the Grousebeater's with me today as well. Before I do that, earlier this week, I had the great pleasure of interviewing Neil Hanvey MP of the Alba Party to give me an update and some views on some topical items that we guys will be all talking about shortly. So let me firstly let you enjoy and listen to and be, I'm sure, entertained by Neil Hanvey and my interview with him. Neil, how are you? It's nice to see you again.
I'm good, thank you very much.
Good. It's been ages since we spoke. In fact, it was during the election. But you've been busy back down in Westminster again this week, I believe.
Yeah, it was quite a hectic week. I had some highs and a couple of lows where I was able to get in on two of the debates that I wanted to, but two others, the London or the LCF debate, and that was on behalf of constituents. I managed to get an intervention, but it was frustrating. But the real frustration was yesterday. I hung on to the end of business to get in on the safety of journalism debate because I wanted to speak about the situation and the concerns around the Craig Murray verdict and the process of appeals. And I think, there are some voices who are saying, what about Scottish independence? You're relying on the English Supreme Court. And, well, if we were an independent country, then the case would just go straight to Strasbourg. But as it stands, that is the constitutional position we're in. And that is the court that Craig, quite rightly, is taking his appeal to. I wanted to talk not just about that process, but I also wanted to talk about the continued anonymity of the complainants and the impact that has potentially had, the chilling effect has been alluded to by several members when they were talking about interference with journalism. And there's a real question about who that serves, who that continued anonymity serves. Does it serve the public and the public interest? And what is the purpose of that continued anonymity? It certainly has had a chilling effect on being able to tell the true story of the victorious side, because we're not able to discuss that. And I think that when you think that the protection is set at such a high bar, but the jigsaw identification test is set at such a low level, it's almost impossible to be able to speak about the winning side with any context of safety. So there are some fundamental questions about, does that constitute justice? Is that just that the winning side cannot even tell its own story for fear of prosecution? That's perverse. And I think that, as Roddy Dunlop alluded to in his submission to the court, there is a growing disquiet in Scottish commentariat about potential links into the heart of the political scene in its widest context that raises fundamental questions of conflicts of interest, and there's surely a need to understand if they exist. And that's not about identifying anyone, but it's a fundamental question that needs to be addressed. And I think that this needs to be sifted through, because it's not just about whether Alex is able to tell his story, but it's actually much bigger than that. It's a fundamental principle of justice that you will be protected and you will continue to smear and attack and repeat testimony that has been rejected, not by any particular individual, but by a jury. And it is so frustrating to see both covert and overt attempts to continue to claim that someone who has been found not guilty as guilty. It's absolutely outrageous. And so how can you possibly get justice? So that's a flavour of the debate. And also the last thing I would say, sorry to rabbit on, but it's also the panel-based poll that was conducted that looked at, and probably the most balanced way of assessing whether Craig is guilty of jigsaw identification, is the members of the public who participated in the panel-based poll who cited any individual or organisation that they were able to identify any of the complainers through. Craig wasn't on that list, but Danny Garavelli was the top of that list. She published her piece on an unregulated website, Tortoise, as is Craig's, but he has been held to a higher standard than journalists who signed up to IPSO, and she is not being called into question at all. And I don't see any justice in that whatsoever.
Well, I agree with you, obviously with an interest. And I can say to you that, and we will be looking for support, that the bloggers are talking. And there is a move towards forming our own union and having our own IPSO type standards to protect ourselves. And it is a worry for us all. I mean, I kid and joke about, oh, well, I'll come home and I'll step off the plane, but you just get a wee bit of a worry. So, I can tell you the bloggers, the Scottish Free Medias, we call ourselves, will back any move to support something towards that. But you're right about the public being very uneasy about anonymity. I see it all the time on social media, and I get comments about it and emails about it. People saying, how can they keep doing this? Why wasn't Alec given anonymity at the start and throughout because he was found innocent? How can the innocent party keep being tried? And that's exactly what you've been saying. Do you see any changes coming?
I don't really. I think there are fundamental flaws in the way that the prosecutorial services are organised at the moment. I think we all know what that problem is. That the position currently exercises control over that jurisdiction, but also is politically very close to the Scottish Government cabinet. And whether there is or isn't a malfeasance, that's not the question. It's whether there's an appearance of conflict, and there's clearly an appearance of conflict whether there is any wrongdoing or not. And that is a fundamental principle of the separation of power and authority. And it would seem to be the wisest course of action to take, to neutralise that and to say, OK, we're worried about this too. We don't want to give anyone any cause for accusations of cronyism or whatever. So we're going to stop this and go back to a similar situation as existed before, that the senior law officer reported to the cabinet for advice and various other duties, as you would expect. But I think there's fundamental questions around that, and that's something I know that Kenny, with all of his experience, is interested in pursuing, and I support him fully in that endeavour.
Yeah, the thing about that, I think it absolutely amplifies why we need to be independent, because we have to go to the English Parliament in London and ask them to amend the Scotland Act to remove the law. And if there's ever anything that says we need to be independent and we are a colony, it's that, surely.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point, which is around the people who are scoffing at the notion of somebody from Scotland, going off to the English courts to appeal. Well, if we were an independent country, then I am absolutely confident that Craig would be on his way to Strasbourg. We wouldn't be messing around with a Supreme Court judgment, and I sincerely hope that he gets satisfaction at the Supreme Court. But I'm also confident that if he needs to go to Strasbourg, then he will go, and I would hope that we would be able to support him in that action if we need to do so. Yeah, it's a fundamental point of justice.
Yeah, but the other one that gets me now, I go back to a good lawyer friend of mine who said to me many years ago, always remember, Roddy, there's law and justice. They're two completely different things. Now, I'm no lawyer, but what I find quite strange is that the judge who the contempt was in her court, allegedly, and the jigsaw came from a trial that she was convening over, then ends up in the same panel, hearing the appeal. That just, I mean, as I say, I'm not a legal person. Maybe someone can tell me different, but that doesn't feel right. And if the people, and I'm one of the people, if we don't buy it, we think the law is right or fair, that's not a good thing, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary, and particularly so that this is such a high-profile case. I can't think of any action that would be more sensational than a former First Minister or Prime Minister of a country being accused of such dreadful crimes, only to be found not guilty on every single charge, and then to go on to be smeared and tried in the media yet again. It really, I think people need to take a step back and think, is this normal? And I don't think that it is. And and the point you make is really important about who's on the panel, because if there is appeal against the decision in most other places, it is usually chaired by a different independent person, whether that's in employment or whether that's in the work, informal stuff in the workplace, or even if it's a professional misconduct issue. It's usually a fresh pair of eyes, and again, balancing against other demonstrable cases where people have said, no, I worked out who it was because of the coverage that this other person provided, and Craig is the only person that's being prosecuted. There's a tension there that's very, very uncomfortable. And on the point that you were making about new media in Scotland, that was something that I did emphasise yesterday, which was that one of the most exciting things to come out of the whole independence referendum was the confidence of people like Wings, yourself, Grousebeater, Scott Goes Pop. All of these sites sprung up to fill a void in the media, and they challenged the narrative and they told the truth. And I'm really worried that wonderful fresh media is now being scared and deliberately attacked to drive it underground again. And what worries me most and what confuses me most is that a lot of that comes from voices on the yes side. I'm not going to single them out. People know who they are. And I just find that absolutely extraordinary. Now, I don't agree with everything that's published on the Courier. I don't agree with, they carry Jenny Jewell, for goodness sake. I don't agree with that. But I read that paper. So for someone like Wings, who was pilloried endlessly, I don't agree with everything that he wrote. But the level of detail and analysis and facts that he presented in the independence referendum would, outrank any contribution by most politicians, because it gave myself and so many people in the teams that I worked across the information that they needed to have those conversations with voters. And that contribution, and the contribution from all of the new media in Scotland, cannot be underestimated. And I can't for the life of me understand why the new media is being attacked by our own side.
Well, I think I can, because we're trying to hold them to account, and I think they don't like being held to knowing. If I could just highlight again, I highlighted it last Sunday, but I want to highlight it again last Sunday, with the height of all the stuff that happened with Marion Miller, etc., and what began on with Craig. We couldn't get a lady to appear on the show. They were too scared to come. I'm not making that up. And there's actually another lady who's writing a blog, and she wanted to do it, and she came to me and said, well, I think I'm going to do it under a pseudonym, Roddy. Would you publish it? And I'm not sure. And she's come back to me again this week. She said, I just don't know. I'm just so scared. And that's wrong. In a free and open society, there's a lot of things that are written by my fellow bloggers that I don't agree with. I don't take the same side. And one of the things I think about our Yes movement, and going back to the referendum, is it was such was such a broad church, left, right, non-political, and that's changed. I've lost you now. Your camera's gone.
I should be back now. Sorry.
You're back.
I had a connection problem.
So with all that broad church, I know, but the broad church that was there, some of it's now scared to speak up. That cannot be right in a democracy.
Yeah, and it's strange, because, I keep getting told that I'm attacking the SNP. Let's get a grip. I left the SNP, and they are now a different political party to the one that I'm in. I'm not attacking them. I'm pointing out politically where I see differences and where I think things went wrong, and I think that's entirely proper. This notion that the party, and most importantly some of the individuals in it, are beyond reproach or criticism or question, I think that smacks of totalitarianism. I know, and we're nowhere near that, but everything starts at a certain point, and when you've got women frightened to come and talk about their experience, I find that utterly extraordinary and worrying. I hope now that the Maya Forstater judgment has been delivered, that women will begin to build their confidence beyond. I mean, the movement has done an amazing job. People like Joan McAlpine, who, from my experience, kicked all this off and were outspoken about risks and concerns right at the beginning. They have achieved something quite extraordinary in the face of unbelievable hostility that has driven a wedge into the movement that just simply did not need to be there. And a lot of that has been fueled by the indifference and deaf ears of people who should take a much more nuanced and balanced view of difficult issues, and the need to listen to people who have opposing views is one of the most important qualities of, I think, anybody who's involved in politics. The knee-jerk responses. I think it was Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was one of his comments, was something along the lines of, one of the biggest impediments to listening is the person who is waiting to speak. So they're putting their efforts into, well, I'm going to say this, and they're not listening to what's being said. And I reject entirely the charge that there has been, the same kind of behaviour on both sides of this debate. I've been there, I've been in the middle of it, and I've had a shocking time. I'm just hope that now that we have that judgment, now that we have that balanced view, now that we know what the equalities legislation means in this discussion, that we can stand up robustly to any attempts to smear and undermine and attack anyone who holds gender critical views. But by the same token, I said this in a tweet last night, what we must not do is overreach that finding, that overreach that judgment, and think that we now have a license to be in any way aggressive. And I don't believe anybody will be, but we've got to be the bigger people. We've got to try and bring things together. I mean, another reflection I had last night was none of this was necessary. Right at the beginning, if there had been a willingness to hold a citizens' assembly, if there had been a willingness to reach out and a willingness to build bridges and understanding, I don't think we would have got to this place. But certainly my attempts to be some kind of peace broker, led to real problems for me. That was part of my activity during the 2019 campaign, speaking to Scottish Trans Alliance and the Equality Network, and speaking to For Women Scotland, and trying to broker some kind of agreement to come together. And I think that was just seen as unhelpful for some bizarre reason.
Yeah. Well, the judgment was taken in England, unfortunately, not in Scotland. But immediately the First Minister made her statement yesterday in Holyrood, which I found quite insensitive, bizarre, and it was as if she was, I don't care what's happening down there, we are where we are, and we're going to keep doing what we do. That's what it felt like, and that's what a lot of people, whether that's what she did mean, or that is what she was trying to express, that is what a lot of people are seeing it as. It was a time to come together, it was a time, but that didn't happen. Do you think Joanna Cherry's shout for a citizen assembly will happen?
I really don't know. I think it's so unpredictable, and it's a difficult one to speculate on, particularly given the the clear animosity towards me for being vocal in this whole discussion. I don't know. I didn't really. I don't really comprehend where the First Minister's coming from on this, from any perspective, and so I'm so confused by the single track focus on it that I don't really know. I don't know what the motivation is, first of all. And so it's hard for me to project forward from that.
Yeah, well, you're confused. I think a lot of the nation are confused as well. We have to hope that good sense and breaks out, and that we can get this matter and put it into perspective, and take the heat out of it, because it really is quite nasty, and it's not good, and it's not good for the cause. It definitely is not good for the cause.
No, I mean, it has been the divisive issue, right back to the very beginning. I think the important thing, I know that the judgment was down south, but the Equalities Act, as far as I recall, I think I'm right, is a UK-wide piece of legislation. So we're probably lucky that that's still a reserved matter.
Isn't that shocking to be able to say that?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's absolutely frightening. And it goes against everything that I stand for. But we at least have that line of defence at the moment, and and it kind of underscores quite a few of my thoughts around the compatibility of the hate crime legislation and the proposed GRA legislation as they currently stand. And I think there's an important question to be asked about testing those pieces of legislation against the Equalities Act, and more importantly, against human rights legislation, which underpin the all legislation of the Scottish Government. Because if they're not compatible, then I'm not sure. It's something that I'm keen to look into when I get a moment, but I'm not sure that would be competent to be passed. Fundamental, if it's not compatible with the law of the land, it cannot pass.
Well, let's hope. We're coming towards the end.
I don't think you can legislate a piece of primary legislation that's incompatible with another piece of primary legislation. There's got to be read across. There's got to be consistency. So,
yeah, just we're coming towards the end, Neil, and just an observation. I'd like your comments on it. But the fact that we are, as we just said, dependent possibly on Westminster changing the Scotland Act to separate the Lord Advocate and the executive sort of position about defending women and against the hate crime bill and the GRA as proposed, and the fact that the First Minister has said, well, we have to wait till all the COVID problems have passed and before we do independence. Have we not just given the Unionists 3 huge sticks to beat us with when the time comes?
Well, it does make you wonder, what they... I don't understand the thinking. I was hands up in 2019 at conference before or 2018 before the 2019 conference. It was the one in the October up in Aberdeen. I was there when Angus and Chris were pushing for a plan B, and I was pretty confident that there must be a plan somewhere in the background that they need to keep that concealed. They don't want to reveal their hand. All of those kind of things. I have absolutely no confidence that there's any plan. Certainly. I mean, what I've witnessed in Westminster gives me no confidence that the party is ready for a referendum. Never mind committed to fighting one. I think the concerns that you've raised are really important, but I don't think we should let that be a stick to beat us, because these inadequacies and these problems have happened, and this is a really important point we must never forget. They have been allowed to happen within the context of the United Kingdom, and as an independent country, we will have a written constitution, we will have a proper separation of powers, and we will have means and opportunities to write into that constitution ways to protect and prevent any overreach from politicians into areas that they really have no business interfering with.
Thank you. On that note, can I thank you? We're right out of time. It's been, as always, Neil, an absolute pleasure. And the next time I see you will hopefully be at a conference.
Yes,
I'll go to the bar. I know where to find you. I'll find you in the bar.
I'll be having a soda water and lime rod.
But you know me, I won't. Not a chance.
Listen, lovely talking to you.
And to you, and thank you very much indeed. And we'll see you soon.
You're welcome. Anytime at all.
Right. Well, there you go. There you go. A tremendous chat with Neil. Very candid, very open, and gave us a lot to discuss. And to do that, to discuss it, I'm joined by 2 of my very good buddies here. As always, Mr. Iain Lawson there, the Paisley Mohawk. And our dear friend from Edinburgh, wonderful Gareth Wardell, the Grousebeater. Gareth, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, indeed I can. You're here and see you
perfectly.
Well,
I can begin by telling you I've got my bottle of hand lotion, just in case we have to mention the SNP at any time in our conversations.
Oh, we're off to a flyer.
Although I may have to drink some of it as well if I have to say something rather than just use sign language.
It was quite good. Ian, welcome to you as well, my friend. How are you?
Greetings from Paisley.
Listen, you saw the Neil Hanvey interview we did earlier this week. He came up with some very interesting points, Gareth. What are your thoughts on this? The ruling that came out of the Craig Murray appeal was that the journalists in the mainstream media, because they've got ipso, they're okay, but us bloggers and essayists are prime targets, and we're really not going to get away with saying anything that isn't liked by anyone.
I thought Neil, if I could sum up what Neil Hanvey was talking about, I think he's talking about the puritanical spirit that has taken over Scotland, led by our First Minister's attitude to sexual peccadillos. Somehow or other, the SNP has shifted from its core cause of civil and constitutional rights to one where it's more interested in the sex lives of its own supporters and citizens. That's worrying to me. It's very Scottish to be puritanical about it. I occasionally get someone coming onto my Twitter site and trying to retry Alex Salmond. And I warn them, if they carry on with that, I would wish to ask intimate questions about their sexual peccadillos, you know, what are they like in bed, and if they've got their eye on a woman or a young boy, how do they make their first move, you know, things like that. That usually puts them off immediately. But it is puritanical. And I thought we had lost that years ago in the 70s. I thought we'd gone through all that whole sexual liberation thing where we could just talk openly about these bits and pieces. But there's no doubt in my mind that the hierarchy of the SNP are more interested in the sex lives of everybody. And the other problem they've got, of course, is guilt by accusation, of which I'm a prime example of that. Neil also mentioned Joan McAlpine, which I thought she tends to be overlooked among, you know, all the various politicians who got hammered by their own colleagues and peers. Before we go on to anything about the trial and Lady Dorian, I need to tell you and let your viewers understand that I know Lady Dorian personally, and I remember being the only person to state that I thought she would give Alex Salmond a very fair trial. One or two people disagreed with that immediately, you know, because in their head the Scottish law system is corrupt. Well, there are corrupt individuals, but I don't think the whole Scottish law system is corrupt. I've had to use the Court of Sessions, for example, 3 times, and I won my cases 3 times, conducting them myself to save legal fees, having paid some legal fees for advice before I walk into the court, and taking my cap off before the usher told me to do it. So I was aware that Lady Dorian would be very fair, and in fact, the first signal I got that I was right about that was when she dismissed one of the supposed witnesses as having absolutely nothing to accuse Alex Salmond about. That came quite early on in that case. The other thing that Neil was saying, my final point, and that is the number of people who are trying desperately to keep the whole Alex Salmond case, you know, going, keep the flames fanned. There's no smoke without fire. It's just reprehensible. So I've got to the stage on my own site that I warn them, if they're going to vilify Alex Salmond, retry him, or if they're going to vilify the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, they will get blocked. I really don't want to handle libel, you know, and have lawyers coming after me. I don't run a platform I have a news site where people can make comment, but they have to make intelligent comment. They can't just come on and denounce somebody day after day after day, you know, with no evidence to back up their point of view. It's just low opinion. Anyway, that's where I am.
Yep.
Puritanical.
Iain.
Puritanical Scotland.
Iain, what did you make of what Neil had to say there about the ruling against Craig? Although I don't want to go into it too much, because obviously we've got Craig coming up shortly, and I'll be asking him, you know, straight from the horse's mouth. But what did you take from what Neil was saying?
Well, I think I accept much of what Neil said, but I do believe, you know, we as bloggers need to get organised, because there's absolutely no question we're under attack. And if one of us make a mistake, you can be sure the full might of the law will fall upon us with great speed, because there's nothing they would like more than to get rid of people like yourself and Grouse Peter and yourself, Roddy, along with me. So the reason for it is, it's not a big mystery. It's they can't control us, and we are not beholden to them. So we owe our loyalty to the truth as we see it. And we have the guts and gumption to write that truth and put it in print. And hopefully we find other people within society who agree with us. Now, we know that happens, but they would like to close that down. And I mean, what we're witnessing is the most severe attack on freedom of speech that has existed in Scotland in my lifetime. There is no question. This is as near totalitarian practice as is possible while still remaining a democracy. And there's arguments about that. The reason they pursue Alex Salmond is because they can't afford freedom of speech on that matter. They have to protect the lies that were told in that trial. And unfortunately, Lady Dorian, I don't believe she did this deliberately, but I think the consequence of giving these people anonymity is that it's provided them with an avenue to continue smearing, even after Alex Salmond has been proved conclusively innocent of all the charges against him. And when you talk about the SNP being overburdened with interest in everyone's sexual practices, that perhaps explains why they don't show much interest in me, because that wouldn't take them long. But nevertheless, you know, I think it's pretty important that folk are entitled to their own privacy. And if you're going to award anonymity, then surely on balance, it must be for both those making the allegations and those being the accused, until such times as they are found guilty, when that loss of anonymity at that point. No one would have had any complaints if that had been the case with Alex Salmond. The problems all arose because people manipulated from the benefit of anonymity to expose and damage. Look at the damage that happened to Alex Salmond long before he got near a trial room, with a leak from the First Minister's office, we believe, to the Daily Record, all the charges. He was damaged, massively.
It's been quite terrible. The other thing that Neil was mentioning, I'd like to do quickly on this one, because I've got one other topic I'd like us to cover just before I go and speak to Craig, and that was the Myra Forstata, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, ruling down in England with the Equalities Act, the lady that lost her job for...
That was good news.
Yeah, for suggesting that women are women.
I just thought it was tremendous good news that we can, people can hold an opinion, and it isn't negated because it's not the official wisdom. And I mean, that's what Boris and his gang and Nicola and her stewards, you know, her chief Praetorian Guard are promulgating at the moment. You know, there is only one view, and it's the official view. Very sad that the SNP is degraded to this extent, where it's just saying the same thing as the British press. You know, it's engineering consent, it's engineering opinion. It's telling you if you don't believe this or that, then you'll be alienated. you'll be sent out from the party, whatever. So winning our appeal was a wonderful thing. And I noticed too that the Stonewall organisation, who has to carry the can for a hell of a lot of this disastrous attitude to gender and male and female rights, used the judgment to bolster its own opinion, which I sort of thought that was ironical, They turned it around and said, look, we were right after all. No, you weren't right. You lost the case. Don't give us that. So my worry out of all of this is that our government has pulled together a committee led by Lady Dorian to discuss whether or not rape trials should be conducted by a judge and not a jury, a jury of our peers, the traditional democratic way. A couple of years ago, I was on a jury of a rape trial, and I'm obviously not at liberty to talk about the detail, but it was a jury that came up with a verdict. And I've been trying to think how the hell you do this without a jury, without 15 people sitting there arguing, as we did for 2 days, about whether or not the accused was, premeditated what he did, or whether it was just an action of the moment. And the only way I could think it can be done is that you have 3 judges, so it's a majority of judges. But judges are susceptible to their prejudices, their views, dare I say it, to the peer pressure of their local club, gentleman golf course club, whatever it is, smoking club. They might have political views. No matter how much they say we're completely impartial, they still are human with their own prejudices. So it has to be a group of people with no specific knowledge of the accused. They have to judge the facts that are presented to them, which means entirely that it's left to the defense counsel and the prosecution counsel to make the case. So I'd be worried if it was just left to judges. I remember one of my cases, the judge was off that I had been using. That judge was off one day, and I had a female judge, and she took immediate dislike to me. It was as quick as that. I got one sentence out. And she censored something that I said about the lawyer. And I thought, she must have misheard me. I'm not being personal about this guy. All I'm saying is what he had to say yesterday is different from what he had to say today. So I'm just giving you that anecdote to say that, judges are susceptible to moods, the same as the rest of us, to dislikes to somebody who's standing in front of them, So that's where I would feel the next concern should be, and that's rape cases where there is complete anonymity for one side only. Maybe they should be held in camera until such time as the judgment is made. Maybe that's the solution. I don't know. I haven't thought that one through, but it's certainly not where there's only 1, 2, or 3 judges, and that's it.
You're mute, I think.
I think Ian's microphone has dropped out. No?
Here, I forgot my button. My button. There we go.
Right. Start again.
I'm sorry about that. I was off on a rant as well. There's one discussion here I'd like to take part in as well, because I was going to say I've got some skin in the game here, and it was something else that was mentioned briefly by Neil, but today it's come out as a big story, and a couple of our bloggers have joined in on it, and that's the nets closing in on the ring fence money, Iain. It's getting close. This is the headline in the Mail on Sunday. Now,
Yeah, I mean, this
just
is
before you go, but when this came out, and I put out a tweet and I said, as soon as this goes out, the faithful are going to come in. It's the Mail. Just discount it. But we had a great blog today from Grumpy Scotsman, one of our colleagues, who said, well, when Wings told you, and Grousebeater told you, and Barrhead Boy told you, and Iain Lawson told you, you rubbish the source when they tell you anything. They just rubbish anything. But the net is closing, it seems, Iain.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really bad day for the SNP cultists today. I mean, you've got the judgment from Forstata, you've got the story and Nicola's admission and the police statement in this newspaper article that the money was raised and it was spent on other things. Now, I get called and you get called and everyone that highlighted this get called all sorts of names. We were all told we were idiots, you know. But the real idiots were the folk that haven't got the ability to look at a set of accounts and notice that when you've only got assets, net assets are just under 300,000, you can't possibly have 600,000 away in a bank somewhere, you know. And the idiots were them. And of course, it's now proved that we were right and they were wrong and that they were misled. And, you know, the problem the SNP have got now is they are misleading people on a daily basis. You know, first of all, there was no ring fence fund. Then there was a ring fence fund. Then you couldn't get your money back. Then you can get your money back. To the point now that they're throwing it about like confetti. I mean, you get a next day service. If you contact them now, it's in your bank account the next day. And that's not getting paid out the ring fence funds because Nicola's now made absolutely public. There are no ring fence funds in a separate account. There is one account, which means all these rebates are getting paid out of SNP members' money today, not out of some ancient ring fence fund that they hadn't touched. They spent that money. Mm-hmm. And it looks to me very much as if the Wings original story that they had to spend the money giving the £500,000 back to the Weirs because they became fed up and felt that they'd been misled. They'd given that money for India F2 and they weren't happy when they discovered it was getting used in other things and they asked for their money back and that created the crisis. But instead of being honest, they tried to cover it up like they do all the time and they've ended up in this mess. We'll see what happens, whether the police go ahead. But I know that they haven't spoken to the National Treasurer who resigned yet. I do know they have talked to some of the people that were on the audit committee and taken evidence from them. I do believe that when they eventually get to Douglas Chapman, he will be candid and honest.
Well, I hope so, if I can interrupt you, because it isn't good enough to say I have just resigned from the...
No, I don't think he has any intention of doing that. From
committee, you know, I will say nothing further about it. That isn't good enough. That's not an elected representative that, you know, I want to vote for. People have got this strange idea of leadership. You know, leadership is something that is quite different from adoration, you know, from uncritical admiration of a person who's been elected, not by you, unlike the last election that gave voters the impression we were electing a first minister that we liked, is elected by their party. As soon as you're elected, you're up for criticism. And this is why I object to the wholesale blocking by our MPs and MSPs of anybody they disliked. They dislike who comes on Twitter with a point of view or an opinion. They have to understand that Twitter has its own authority. You know, if someone is abusive, they can report them. If somebody's, you know, issuing a death threat, they can call the police. But if their political party is going to allow them to use Twitter, they have to be told you can't block anybody. You know, this is now a modern day access by the public to you who is elected. And if you don't have a thick skin, then don't use Twitter. It's got to be one or the other. We don't use Twitter, or we do use Twitter. The BBC, as you know, Tim Davis, the new Director General, has told his journalists, don't use Twitter. Don't go on there and start showing you're a member of the Tory party, you know, or you actually think the British National Party have a point of view worth considering. You know, Nigel Farage is one of Britain's greatest heroes. For God's sake, you know, it's got to be one thing or the other. And yeah, there will people, you know, as I get, there are people come on who are just negative. You know, that's all they've got. They're on to denounce, to suggest somebody's really bad, and they changed to this horrible person. I read that about Stuart Campbell and Wings almost every day, and I write back to them and say, so you were raided by the police, you had all your facilities taken away for days on end, you were harassed by organised campaigns to ruin your reputation. You've had all these things, I take it. That's why. Is that why you feel this way about Wings? What is it you're trying to say? Mm-hmm. So the tough guys ought to be our MPs. If you're going to go into public service, like when you went to a door and knocked on it and say, "Hello, I'm from the Labour Party. I'm hoping," bang, you know, you'll get the door slammed on you now and again. You just take that, but you end up like a good stand-up comedian having a one-line riposte to these things. You know, you work up ways of softening the blow, you know, of breaking the ice with people. You know, you've got to shake hands with people in the street. You've got to kiss babies. You've got to do these things. So Twitter is here to stay. And as for a union, well, I would like to think only good can come from that, but by God, it's going to have to be somebody tough who's running the damn thing.
I'd be a good shop steward. What about me, Gareth? Can I be a good shop steward? Comrade Roddy.
Gives a job.
Just on this, I have to go, Jed. We're coming towards the end here.
I can do that. Gives a job.
I've got Craig waiting, and I want to get to Craig as soon as I can, but I'd like just to throw my tuppence worth in all this thing. And if Stuart Campbell, I don't know if he listens or ever gets, if anyone knows him and wants him, tell him, come back, Stuart. All is forgiven. We need you, mate. We need you. We need your brains, your analytical brain, your punch. We need it. We miss you. But I understand why he did go away. And I mean, I take a bit of a beating. We all do, but nothing in comparison to what he did. But I just wanted to say this before we go to all those people who will discount the story in the Mail today because it's from the Mail. You didn't discount when Nicola Sturgeon employed the guy that wrote the vow, the guy, and put him in charge of communications. You didn't discount the source when she stood with the Daily Record and the Sun, for God's sake, and the Scotsman, and attacked an innocent man and a pro-independence party. You kept silent. Don't you dare now say that you don't like this source, because you didn't say anything either when she gave them £3 million. And when they all turn and they call us pro-independence bloggers, you try and say that we're the ones that tell the lies. Use your brains, folks. We're telling you the truth. When are you going to start listening to us?
Get criticised for allegedly adoring Alex Salmond. But, you know, I remember criticising him really strongly for schmoozing with Rupert Murdoch. Remember, he went to Murdoch and said, look, if your newspapers could just, you know, give us a break, even for a short time, I'll help you set up your new headquarters in Scotland. So he obviously was thinking, great, I'm going to create employment, you know, and at the same time, I'm going to have Murdoch's newspapers voting strongly for independence. Well, I think the Sun gave us 3 months before they discovered Alex Salmond believed in staying in the European Union. And the next day, the Sun said, tough. You know, I came out against the SNP.
Well,
so there are other things too that I criticised Alex Salmond about, and it did occur to me that in time, you know, if he wasn't a boozer, something else would trip him up. Because the pressures on him were just absolutely immense. And you knew, for example, that he must be a really tough guy to keep people in line, keep people moving towards the ideal and somebody somewhere would interpret that as bullying. Oh, he's just a bully. Well, you're in the wrong game if you thought he was a bully. I mean, he's only trying to get your country back.
Gareth, as Alec found out, and as Nicola Sturgeon is beginning to find out, if you lie down with dogs, you get fleas, and that's what's happening now. Gentlemen, I really, much as I dislike to do it, because I could sit and talk to you guys all day, every day, but we have to move on because I've got another guest appearing. Can I thank you for your time and your comments today? And as usual, the usual fee will be sent, or not, as the case may be. But thank you for being here today.
Cheers, Randy.
Pleasure. See you again soon.
Well, folks, before introducing my next guest, I would just like to play a short video, which I think can do better than I could introducing my next guest.
Who has been a staple for Assange Countdown to Freedom, and one of the greatest supporters, most eloquent, articulate, consistent, passionate, is Craig Murray. Has been Craig Murray. Now, Craig's about to go to jail. Craig Murray is one of the bravest, courageous guys I've ever met in my life. And he's been there for Julian for 11 years. So what I'd like to do right now is because I know he's watching, everybody please show your love and appreciation for Craig Murray.
And it's my delight and pleasure to welcome Craig Murray to Through a Scottish Prism. Craig, welcome. Can I just take up Randy's, and can I also give you some applause, sir? You have my utmost respect. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Roddy. And it's a lovely day here in Edinburgh. I was worried by what Gareth said about Sturgeon bringing a spirit of Puritanism creeping over Scotland. So I thought I should vaccinate myself against that.
Quite right. I'll be doing similar myself. People think this is water, Craig. It's not. No, it is, before you all start saying it is honest. But there'll be a gin and tonic flowing shortly. You've been through the wars, Mr. Murray. I don't need to say that. And I don't think for anyone watching this particular podcast, I have to go through it. But there are several things. I don't know how you're bearing up. I am amazed that you're not in a straitjacket and slabbering, because the pressure on you must be immense, and on your family. How are you coping with that?
It's been very horrible. I mean, obviously the trials and the case has gone on for over a year now. There have been, I think, 9 different hearings in that time. And when you work it through, each hearing costs on average about £25,000. That's enough. That's enough in all the costs leading up to it in the hearing itself. That's enough of the pressure already. Since once we got to the actual substantive hearing, there was then a 3-month wait for the judgment, 3-month wait for the verdict, which is astonishing, truly astonishing. If it were a jury trial, no jury is allowed to wait. 2 weeks is the absolute maximum the jury would ever be allowed to deliberate. After that, they'd be told, dismissed. For them to spend 3 months deciding on whether I was guilty or not, and at that stage, of course, there's nothing more you can do. So the daily pressure of that on me and my family. Then they came back with a guilty verdict, or finding of in contempt, to be technical, which astonished us because we weren't really expecting that. Then there was a further wait of 2 months while they decided on the sentence. So all that was 5 months of waiting. 5 months of waiting between being found in contempt and then being sentenced to 8 months in jail. And again, that was just far, far miles away. My legal team genuinely didn't think I would be found in contempt, and then they genuinely didn't think I would go to prison. I mean, both of those came as a shock to them, let alone 8 months. Then, of course, we've had the the request to appeal, which has been turned down, and now I've got a further stay of going to jail for another month while we apply direct to the Supreme Court for permission to appeal. And it's all fairly horrible. It's like a kind of sword of Damocles over your head the entire time. And it's hard enough for me, but for the family, it's really awful. I mean, it really is awful. You know, we've had obviously the strain on Nadira. We've got a 4-month-old baby in the house. My son, who's 12, has been in tears from time to time. It's hard to describe day to day how difficult it's been. It really has been fairly awful. I'm not trying to say other people don't suffer the same and we don't have other problems in our criminal justice system. And I'm not claiming to be unique in any other way, but it is an awful time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, what annoys me actually is the silence of the people, the very same people. If this was happening to you in Belarus or in China, the very people who'd be shouting how disgusting and terrible it was are silent while this happens, because it's the famous phrase, first they came for the communists and I said nothing. Well, first they came for Alex Salmond, and then they came for Craig Murray, and they came for Mark Hurst, and who and Marion Miller or whoever. Who's going to be next? So I find that's what particularly annoys me. Did you not feel? I mean, you're not a member of the NUJ, but you were, I believe, at some point. But as a journalist of standing, an author of standing, an ex-ambassador, do you not feel slightly let down by a lot of people who you think should have been supporting you?
Well, I think so, very much. And organisations like Amnesty International, for example, like PEN, the writers' organisation, like Index on Censorship, none of these have come in to support me, because in this country you're establishment or you're not, basically, and you're within what they call the Overton window, the spectrum of permitted opinion that is allowed on the BBC, in effect. And I'm outside that. I'm a whistleblower. I've revealed state secrets about torture and extraordinary rendition. Subsequently, I've worked with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I'm regarded as a dissident and not respectable.
Just
and
a
all
bit.
These, middle-class organisations which claim to be defending human rights, like Amnesty and PEN, don't want to defend the human rights of somebody who is not looked kindly on by the establishment. I find that extremely scary. I'll give a shout out to Reporters Without Borders, who have given me very strong backing. But the failure of the NUJ mysteriously declining my membership renewal. I applied. It's slightly complicated. I was a temporary member for 3 years. You can't graduate. You can only be a temporary member for 3 years, and you can't graduate to permanent member until your income from journalism is more than 50% of your income. There was a hiatus of a year or so when I didn't make that criterion. As soon as I did make the criterion, I applied to renew my membership as full membership before the contempt proceedings arrived, before I was charged. And mysteriously, for 8 or 9 months, they just didn't answer my request to renew. And in the end, they turned it down, saying I'd not given sufficient evidence of income. But I found that quite extraordinary. And I'm told nobody else who's joined as a freelance has ever been asked for evidence of their income.
So it's, you maybe heard earlier the discussion we were having earlier on, where there are talk among some of the bloggers that we need to form some kind of, we have got the Scottish Free Media, which is just a group of bloggers who are coming together to, and it's been inspired, if that's the right word, I don't, by you and what's happened to you and Mark, that we need to have some kind of mutual defence. And with the judges ruling at your appeal about, I mean, did you not find that strange when she was saying that, well, the journalists, well, that's different, that's as if that's okay. And I know it's anti-establishment, but you're held to a higher plane than them. Like justice has got to be the same, surely.
she had to find a reason why I've been prosecuted, but Danny Garavelli hasn't been prosecuted, Kirsty Walk hasn't been prosecuted, all these other mainstream media journalists. Because, as you know, we had an opinion poll which asked people how they knew identities, those who do know identities, and 70 proper opinion poll done by panel base with properly approved questions. 73% of those who know an identity learnt it from a mainstream media, TV, radio, or newspapers. And given a free field to answer, how did you know? Where did you get the information? 15 times more people said Danny Garavelli than said Craig Murray. And 4 times more people said Kirsty Walk than said Craig Murray. Yet Kirsty Walk and Danny Garavelli haven't been prosecuted. And they have to somehow justify that. So what they're saying is that bloggers and the mainstream media are in a different position because the mainstream media are self-regulated under the editor's code, so they don't have to be prosecuted, whereas bloggers do, which is a totally crazy argument. I mean, if you do the same thing, then you should be subject to the same law. And the idea, and it specifically said that, and it says in terms that mainstream media have a higher ethical standard than bloggers, which to me, I mean, the idea that any Murdoch employee has a higher ethical standard than you or me automatically just because they're a Murdoch employee.
How many mobile phones have you hacked into recently?
Well, precisely. I haven't ever gone chasing parents of dead children. The idea that the mainstream media is much more ethical, therefore these harsh laws should only be applied to bloggers, because that's what the judgment says. Right. It's actually what I want to get over to. It's not just what's happening to me. This is a very dangerous judgment.
Yes.
This is a very dangerous judgment, which is going to be used against alternative media, against bloggers, and against non-regulated websites for years to come. It's a very, very dangerous judgment.
Yep, and that's why we've got to do something. That's something maybe another time I will have a longer discussion with you that we should talk about getting something organised. But the other part of the judgment I'd like to ask your opinion on, and if by the way, if there's anything I asked that could affect your appeal, please just block me. But jigsaw identification needs more than one party. So shouldn't there at least have been one other person in the dock with you that led to this jigsaw? How can you do a single piece jigsaw?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt. I don't think there's any claim that anything I published in itself could lead to identification. But when you add it together with other things, I do think in one case there is a claim that if you read something I wrote and put that together with something else I'd written 11 months previously and had remembered them both, which would be quite a feat, because I must confess I myself hadn't remembered them both, or I wouldn't have done it that way. That you could say, I do think there's one instance where they say I myself was sufficient for identification in 2 different places. But otherwise, I mean, there's one instance where you could do the jigsaw if you read what I wrote and also had read an inside page of a regional newspaper 6 years earlier, and also had read a book, which I shan't mention in case I'm accused of aiding identification. But the 3 pieces put together were the book, the regional newspaper, and my blog. And if you went to all of those, you could put together the ID. Well, I mean, yes, theoretically, perhaps you could. But this is an entirely theoretical construct. And the fact remains, there was never at any stage any evidence given in court that anybody had actually made an identification from anything I wrote. That's the quite extraordinary thing about this. There was no evidential base, which is extremely difficult. Plus, how are you meant to report? I mean, how am I supposed to know that if you put that bit of information together with a book I'd never read and a regional newspaper published several hundred miles away from where I live, that you could get an identity? It sets an unreachable standard. But what it does, of course, is set a standard which is so low, it means they can get anyone they don't want. Then if they have an excuse for not prosecuting those people they don't want to prosecute, i.e. the difference between mainstream media and bloggers, then it's just a tool for selective political prosecution, and that's what this is.
I'd like to put a question to you that someone tried with me on social media, and I replied with some, shall we say, industrial language, I think one calls it, and the block button. But what would you say to some people who would say, well, he's a very clever man, Craig Murray. He did this on purpose because he wanted to be a martyr.
Well,
someone did say that to me. I assure you.
Yeah, no, I've heard it said as well. I mean, anyone who thinks I want to go to jail, I can assure you, I don't. I appear fine. I react fine. I'm good here in my own study, but we have to very carefully manage a number of medical conditions I have, which are life limiting. I mean they drastically shorten your life expectancy. So being in an environment I can't control is particularly worrying to me, and I certainly don't want to leave my wife and family. So no, but it's also, I mean, one thing I want to make absolutely plain is I did not, in my view, I don't believe I actually did identify anybody. And I certainly did not deliberately identify anybody. One of the peculiar things about the judgment is, in the judgment, Lady Dorian says that I deliberately and gleefully conducted a campaign to reveal the names, but I quite deliberately, over a period of time, scattered enough clue to reveal the names. That not only is that not true, nobody at the time who read all the articles, and remember, there are tens of thousands of people, possibly hundreds of thousands, who read all the articles. Nobody said it at the time, not one person. Nobody ever accused me of deliberately setting clues that outed the people. And remember, among the tens of thousands who read it were those hordes of paid post-Sturgeon SNP staff or whoever they have doing their trolling. Not even any of them ever said you are deliberately conducting a campaign of outing people. Nobody ever saw that before Lady Dorian claimed to see it in her reading of the articles. And I just find that astonishing.
Moving on, because time is always the enemy in these things, but just so people understand, the fact that you're trying to go, and I use the word trying, going to the Supreme Court in London, I mean, there's no guarantee that they will hear your case yet, or have you had any, can you give us any update that they will hear your case?
No, there's no guarantee, and we can only do it on specific points. You can only do it basically on the basis of breaches of the European Convention of Human Rights in practice. And that means, for example, we can't argue that Lady Dorian was wrong in her reading. All the points I've made to you about, you're taking together 3 articles from entirely different sources, or that there is no evidence because it's not true, so there couldn't be any evidence. But there's no evidence anyone identified someone. Nobody except Lady Dorian ever said that I was embarked on a campaign to do it. All of that isn't admissible. None of that can be argued in the Supreme Court, unfortunately. Lady Dorian remains the sole judge of the facts of the case. What we have to argue is that mistakes have been made in law. So there are technical arguments about things not being specified in the petition that should be. There are arguments, there's a strong argument, the strongest argument in my view is that by setting such a low bar for jigsaw identification, you make it practically impossible to report the defence case, and that's a breach of Article 10. There's also a strong argument that it's incompatible with rulings of the European Court to jail a writer. Writers should not be imprisoned if they go wrong. If media organisations or new media make a mistake, they should be fined, not jailed. So those general arguments we have to argue on, not the facts of the case, unfortunately. The facts of the case, the only judge of those, because there is no avenue of appeal on the facts, the only judge of those will ever be Lady Dorian. And I'd just like to say, in conclusion of that, I mean, it is horrifying to me that a writer can be jailed without a jury, no jury, and might have no appeal. You know, what kind of country are you where a writer can be put in prison and they have no right of? I have no right of appeal. We have to hope the Supreme Court will agree to hear it, but there is no right of appeal in Scotland if they do this to you. And I'm having to even go outside Scotland to try to get an appeal, and with no guarantee of success.
Yeah. So also the cost of this must be quite horrific.
Astonishing. I mean, truly, truly astonishing. I think to date we've spent about £185,000, and that's before. That's about any of the costs of the request of the appeal court to hear the appeal, and of course the costs at the Supreme Court itself. So I think if we do manage to get the thing through the Supreme Court, we're looking at least doubling that. And of course, I mean, I'm extremely fortunate that so many wonderful people have contributed to my defence fund, and actually nearly all of that money has been paid by other people, not by me. Over 13,000 people worldwide have contributed to my defence fund. We saw the meeting in New York that you kindly introduced it with. A lot of money's come in from the States. Money's come in from all around the world. Just over half the money has come from Scotland. But there've been somebody put in one Bitcoin, which is the biggest single donation. We've had £20,000 from Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, which has been very helpful. Vivian Westwood put in £10,000, but the average, but the normal contribution, has been £5, £10. People just putting.
And do you have enough money in the fund just now?
Yeah, at the moment we've got enough money to get through the appeal, the request to appeal, and hopefully the preparation of the appeal
successfully appeal
to the Supreme Court. So, yeah, no, it's not bad. I'm not going to tell exactly how much money we've got in the fund, because one thing I've noticed is every time I tell people exactly how much is in the fund, the next day I get a bill from the lawyers for that amount.
Yeah, we better not tell. But if you need, you've got to come back and tell us, and we'll push the appeal. Just a couple of final questions. We should be pushing the appeal anyway. If for any reason you're not allowed to go to the Supreme Court, I assume you'll just go straight to the European Court.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Although almost certainly I'd have to do that from in jail. But yes, yeah.
Yeah, don't say that. We hope that doesn't happen. Last question, if I may, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, because even more than ever now, your time with your family is precious. What can we in Scotland do to help you, Craig? Because there's lots of people out there, believe me, who want to help. What can we do?
I think we've just started. People have come forward, and a defence committee has just been initiated, which is going to have its first meeting early next week. And I think that's going to start to organise, particularly now COVID restrictions are lifting, a few vigils and public gatherings and campaigns to write to your MP, or all that kind of general campaigning stuff, I think is very, very important to do. And I'm hoping I'm hoping that will happen. But the other thing is I don't want this to become a distraction from campaigning for independence. The most important thing you can do is redouble campaigning for independence. And the fact is we've just got the Scottish government re-elected with a mandate, and yet again showing no intention whatsoever of doing anything with that mandate. And that is what needs your attention now. We need to start absolutely pressurising all SNP elected representatives to get off their arses and actually do something. And that's where I want energies to be focused in the next few months.
You're right. I second that emotion, as they say. Craig, thank you so much for your time and your candid views today. They are greatly appreciated. We're here for you, as I say. If you need anything from us, you just got to call us. In the meantime, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And there you have it, folks. Fantastic Craig Murray. How the man is showing such stoicism, I do not know. People like Craig and Alex Salmond are, they just amaze me. I'd be a snivelling wreck. Well, anyway, that's us for another week. We have a couple of shows coming during the week. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any more comments to make, make them. Let us know what you want to hear, what you see, what you think. And don't forget, if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button now. But until I see you again soon, please, you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barrhead Boy.